The Bible prophesies that a one-world government, ultimately ruled by the Antichrist, will be established on the earth just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. We will discuss the origin of this entity and how it is already controlling much of the earth today on Politics and Religion.
Look, there are two things I don't discuss: politics and religion.
In my house, we don't talk about politics and we don't talk about religion.
I'll talk to you about anything except politics and religion.
I never talk about politics and religion.
Politics determines how we'll live here on earth. Religion determines how we'll live forever. I'm Irvin Baxter. I think it's time we talk about it.
Welcome to Politics and Religion, everyone. Before I get started into my program today, I wanted to thank the Lord for a special prayer that He's answered for us. Many of you know that Kim Davis, the Rowan County clerk who was wrongfully imprisoned for not issuing marriage license to same-sex couples, she was imprisoned about a week or so ago. Well, it appears over the last few hours that she's now been released from jail just before the huge speech that was going to be made by Mike Huckabee there. He was actually going to see her in jail, but she was released before that could happen. So if you haven't heard it already, I know the buzz is going across the internet and across the news world that she's just been released. So we want to thank the Lord for that. It is truly an answered prayer. We stood totally with Kim. We tried to get a hold of her and her pastor to actually have her on the radio program for an interview, but she was so inundated with the news media and with some death threats, actually, that she quit taking phone calls. So I just wanted to let everybody know that that was an answer to prayer. She was just released from jail, and it appears she may show up at the speech given by Mike Huckabee. Not sure about that, but it's not what my program's on today, but I'm just thankful to the Lord for the answered prayer because she was wrongfully put in jail, and we stand behind Kim Davis. So thank you, Lord, for that. On today's program, I'm going to try to shape your worldview according to prophecy written 2,000 to 2,500 years ago. This past Saturday night, I took my wife Jana out to a nice dinner to celebrate our 27th wedding anniversary. As I sat there with a room full of people, many of them celebrating their own special occasions, I wondered how many of them really understood what was going on in the world today. How much did they know about the prophesied events that have already occurred and the ones that are being fulfilled in our world today? Statistics say that only about 26% of Americans claim to read their Bible on a regular basis, and of those, fewer yet still study prophecy. Well, that is why I believe it is of utmost importance to continually study and reestablish the prophetic teachings given to us by God in the Bible. You see, there are many ways of studying prophecy. One way is to look at the prophecies that have already occurred, such as messianic prophecies of the first coming of Jesus Christ, the first 4 seals, the first 4 trumpets, and the rebirth of the nation of Israel, just to name a few. The other is to study the prophecies that are being fulfilled right now and that will take place in the very near future, prophecies that you and I will both live through. So, take for instance the one world government that is prophesied to be ruled by the Antichrist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. This world government is already established in the earth and is gaining power every day. It is called the United Nations. If you don't understand the United Nations or the world government's role in the last days, it is possible that you could pledge allegiance to that governing system someday, and that obviously would be committing spiritual suicide according to the Bible. So it is important for you to be able to recognize the United Nations for what it was originally designed to do, so that you don't fall prey to its enticing message of hope and peace. So let's begin by explaining where the prophecy of world government is found in Scripture, and then we'll show you how it's already being implemented in the world today. So modern nations mentioned in the Bible. You start off in Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 7. Daniel sees a vision of 4 great beasts rising up out of the sea. The first beast was a lion with eagle's wings. The second was a bear. The third was a leopard with 4 heads. And the fourth was a beast that Daniel could not identify, but he saw that it had 10 horns. So you say, well, what do these beasts symbolize? Well, it tells us right here in Daniel 7. It says, if you continue reading in Daniel 7, we find that verse 17 says, these great beasts which are 4 and 4 kings which shall arise out of the earth. Then verse 23 continues saying, the fourth beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms and shall devour the whole earth. Therefore, according to verse 17, the beasts symbolize kings, and according to verse 23, the beasts symbolize kingdoms. So we know for certain that these beasts represent nations, along with the ruler of each nation. So you say, well, now that we know that they represent nations and the ruler of the nations, well, when will these nations exist? Well, Daniel chapter 7, verse 4 through 8 identifies the 4 beasts. Then in Daniel 7:9 it says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit. Well, this is simply describing the transition from the kingdom of human government to the kingdom of God. The Bible teaches when Jesus Christ returns to the earth, He will remove all human governments and He will establish His kingdom, which will never pass away and will never be destroyed. Here, Daniel is seeing a vision that these beasts with their thrones were cast down, and Jesus was crowned as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It is at this time when the 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ will begin. This is what Scripture refers to as the kingdom of God. This lets us know that these nations will exist on the earth at the second coming of Jesus Christ. Well, can we identify these nations? Well, absolutely. The lion is Great Britain. The lion has been symbolized on Great Britain's flag, and Webster's Third New International Dictionary defines lion as the symbol of Great Britain. Secondly, the eagle's wings symbolize the United States of America, which is easily recognizable by you and I because we're standing here, most of us, unless you're overseas watching. It is the nation's national bird. The reverse side of the U.S. $1 bill obviously pictures the eagle as their national seal. And then the 4-headed leopard is Germany. We have a lot of proofs for that. It's taught in our different lessons and things. And then number 4, the 10-horn beast that Daniel saw is an alliance or federation of 10 nations that will come from the European Union and will eventually subjugate themselves to the power of the Antichrist. So let's talk about the prophesied one world government. Let's jump from Daniel about 650 years to the time when John wrote the book of Revelation. Remember that in Daniel's vision, these beasts or nations were 4 separate beasts or nations. However, when we get to Revelation chapter 13, Revelation 13 merges the 4 beasts from Daniel 7 into one great beast. So they're a unified beast. Revelation 13, 1 through 2 states, And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his horns then crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. This combined beast from Revelation 13 represents the end-time government of the Antichrist. The United Nations, and this is what I want to talk about today, the United Nations is the only structure that is specifically designed to be a one-world governmental system. We frequently hear the words globalization and New World Order. So are globalization and New World Order good things or bad things? Well, Revelation 13:2 tells us that the dragon gave this combined beast his power, his seat, and great authority. Well, Revelation chapter 12, verse 9 explains that the dragon is that old serpent, the devil, and Satan. Therefore, Satan will give this end-time one-world government its power, its seat, and its authority. The one-world government, the globalization process that we've seen over the past few decades, and the New World Order that is forming now is of the devil. Satan is inspiring it. It is not a good thing at all. So, all the nations represented here, Great Britain, Russia, Germany, and the revived Holy Roman Empire, which is currently known as the European Union, will form this end-time one-world government of the Antichrist, which will be the New World Order. Notice the end of Revelation 13:3 says, all the world wondered after the beast. The entire world will wonder after this New World Order, this one-world government beast. Most people will believe that this is to be one of the greatest things that's ever happened. So, New World Order is world government. We hear the term New World Order more frequently today than ever before. But what is the New World Order? Do you really understand? Because it's very important for you and I to understand. It's very critical. The New World Order, when you hear that term, is simply world government. However, it is not just any world government. It is the world government of the Antichrist. This world government is being formed right now and is prophesied about in the Bible. So before we go to the break, I want to make sure that you understand that you and I are living through the fulfillment of this prophecy. It's a one-world government that's prophesied to be fulfilled, to be in power, governed by the Antichrist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ. The Bible lays it out very clear. It depicts who the nations are in Daniel chapter 7. And then when we get to Daniel, and they're separate beasts in Daniel chapter 7. Then when we get to Revelation 13, those beasts or nations and the rulers of those nations are combined together as one big beast. So the cool thing for you and I is that, and that what gives us hope, is that we know that Great Britain, which is the lion, Germany, which is the leopard, the four heads of the leopard, the bear, which is Russia, and the 10 horns of the 10-horn kingdom, which is the revived Holy Roman Empire, are all mentioned there, but the eagle's wings are not mentioned. So our prayer is that there's a spiritual revival in this nation and that we will have pulled out of the United Nations and are not a member of that one world governing body. So when we come back, we'll finish walking down through and describing to you this one world governing system.
The sign of the four blood moons. What is this teaching of the four blood moons? The teaching says that when 4 consecutive blood moons fall on Jewish feast days, a major event affecting the Jewish people will occur. 4 blood moons will occur on Jewish feast days between April 15, 2014 and September 28, 2015. It is believed that some great event will occur during this time that will change the world forever. Obviously, this time lies just ahead.
Go to endtime.com and under Irvin's Thoughts, click the Sign of the Four Blood Moons link to watch a preview of this video. Attention Indianapolis and South Bend, Indiana. Irvin Baxter's coming to your area for an Endtime conference. He will be speaking on the subject America's God-Given Destiny. Endtime conferences are a great opportunity to meet Irvin and hear the latest events going on in Bible prophecy. Shop Endtime product and meet other people like you who are wanting to learn the prophecies of the Bible. Every time I go to an Endtime conference, I feel so energized like one of the people that can be strong and do exploits as Daniel 11:32 says. Go to endtime.com and under events, click the conference link or call 1-800-ENDTIME to find out more details about these conferences. We'll see you there.
Welcome back to Politics and Religion, everybody. I'm describing to you the one world governing body that will be in power and ruled by the Antichrist at the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ, because it's an entity that you will not, this world governing body and the Antichrist will try to force you into compliance to their edicts and get you to pledge allegiance, or in other words, worship this one world governing system. And that's something that you will not ever want to do, because that will be committing spiritual suicide in your life. Anybody who does that and conforms to their edicts and actually takes their mark of ownership is going to end up in the lake of fire. So that's something you won't want to do. So you're going to want to recognize this so you never comply to their edicts and never pledge allegiance to them. So the term New World Order is written, we heard it all the time, it's written on the back of the U.S. dollar bill. You will actually find it written in Latin inside the ribbon just below the pyramid. And for those of you that are watching on the internet, you can see it in the ribbon just below the pyramid on the back of your dollar bill. There's an inscription that says Novus Ordo Seclorum. The word novus means new. The word ordo means order, and the word seclorum means secular or world, or new world order, new order of the world. Well, why is this term written on the back of the U.S. dollar bill? It has been there since 1935 and was put there by U.S. Franklin D. Roosevelt. Roosevelt dreamed of building a one world governmental system, and he was the driving force behind the establishment of the United Nations, which is established in 1945. So let me give you a little history behind the United Nations. The United Nations is the only structure for one world government. What is the origin? What was the beginnings of this, the UN or the United Nations? Well, World War I, also called the Great War, was the worst war the world had ever known. Prior to this war, there had never been a war with 1 million casualties. But World War I resulted in 8.2 million dead. It was horrific. The world said, never again. We can't do this. We can't have this. It was from this that the idea to establish a structure for global security was birthed. This structure became the League of Nations. The League of Nations was formed in an attempt to ensure another world war would never be fought. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson championed the idea, but the U.S. Congress hesitated at the idea of being part of a world government. They did not want to surrender U.S. sovereignty, so they voted against it because Woodrow Wilson could not carry his own government into the League of Nations. It quickly dismantled and fell apart. 20 years later, however, World War II ended with 52 million casualties. The cry for world security after that became louder than ever, and Franklin D. Roosevelt believed in it, and so he was responsible for the term New World Order. We've got to establish a New World Order, being printed on the back of the U.S. dollar bill. He believed in it that much. Well, at the end of World War II, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt came together at Yalta in an effort to end all war, once and for all. It was during these meetings that the charter for the concept of a global structure, the global governmental structure, called the United Nations was written. One key American man responsible for the formation of the United Nations was Alger Hiss, who was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Some of you will recognize that entity. He organized the American delegation and served and was the acting Secretary General at the first UN meeting. Alger Hiss also served on the steering and executive committees and was charged with the responsibility of actually writing the charter. After playing such a dominant role in developing the Charter of the UN and in the founding conference, 3 years later he was convicted in U.S. courts of lying to cover his activities as a communist spy. And even though he wrote the UN Charter, I've been to the UN several times, there's never a mention of Alger Hiss at the United Nations. Well, I wonder why. So previous to this, Hiss accompanied President Franklin Roosevelt to the Yalta Conference where the carving up of Europe by the United States and Russia took place after World War II. At this time, Roosevelt was a dying man. Consequently, Alger Hiss carried the bulk of the negotiations for America. Well, what Russia did not win on the battlefield, she won at the peace table because her own agent, Alger Hiss, was assisting Roosevelt with the negotiations. This explains why Russia received so many concessions at the peace table at the end of World War II. Well, Alger Hiss designed the United Nations. This is the grand design. He designed the United Nations to be a global union of socialist republics. So I want to make sure you get this point because it is very important that you understand what the United Nations goals are behind every decision. Every decision that they make comes from the United Nations. Remember, it was designed to be a socialistic one world government. So when you hear about a president of the United States going to speak at the United Nations, he's going to speak to a world governing body. Now think about that. Why would the United States, who signed a Declaration of Independence, sign on to this world governing body? You have to ask yourself that. I'm trying to shape your world view here and what's really going on, even with our administration. So the existing United Nations Charter that is currently adhered to was designed to be one of these, a union of socialist republics, a world governing body. Think of it. The emblem of the Soviet Union is a globe with two sheaves of wheat around it with a hammer and sickle superimposed. Well, the emblem of the United Nations is also a globe with two olive branches around it. But when the insignia of the United Nations was designed, the hammer and sickle was left off because including it would have been too obvious. However, Hiss designed the structure of the United Nations to ultimately become a socialistic world government. Hiss went to prison, but the UN continued to be a structure for the one world government system. They've never changed one word of the UN Charter from then till now. So, listen to some excerpts from an article that I found by the Council on Foreign Relations, who Alger Hiss was originally a member of, promoting adherence to the United Nations and its charter. It's titled, "The United Nations and the Future of Global Governance." They're not even really trying to hide it anymore. It's just kind of right out there. It says, states must strike the right balance between self-determination and stability. Conflicts where states fight for territories are vanishing. Most armed violence now arises from populations claiming the same territories and or new regimes coming into power. Therefore, the world must be governed as a whole. The UN is the necessary mediator for this global management. The sovereign state is reshaped both internally via citizens and the media, and externally via global opinion and geopolitical forces. The order is governed by a universal social contract governed by the UN. There is no other way to transform the jungle of states into a society. As we adapt to emerging global threats, let's not lose sight of what we have achieved. The UN has largely fulfilled the chartered goals, there we are with the charter again, established in San Francisco about 70 years ago now, and in doing so has spawned an extensive body, this is how they govern the world, of international laws, treaties, norms, practices, and institutions that govern most facets of interstate relations. With these apps, the UN Charter has become the world's central operating system, the motherboard of global governance. There it is, folks. They're not even trying to hide it. They're telling you exactly what they're doing. It's a global governing body. How does the United Nations govern the world? Well, the UN attempts to have, obviously, a positive influence on human rights, decolonization, aid and development, disarmament and arms control, and promotes the rule of law in international relations. Furthermore, the UN is at the center of an extensive networks of international institutions, bureaus, commissions, known commonly by their 3 or 4 letter abbreviations. There's an alphabet soup of UN agencies. There's a huge number of specialized agencies which deal with almost every area of economic, social, and scientific interaction. A list of some of the most well-known of these international agencies would include the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, which is over financing, development, and managing of payments, the World Trade Organization, WTO, regulating trade between countries, and the International Civil Aviation Organization, or ICAO, standardizing such things as English as the international language of aviation and biometric compliance for identification. Heard anything about that, lady? 666, mark of the beast? The World Health Organization, or WHO, addresses the physical, mental, and social well-being of the people of the world. The World Court, or International Court of Justice, the ICJ, settles disputes between states. The International Criminal Court, or ICC, is a permanent world court claiming jurisdiction over individuals accused of genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. Of course, individual rights and responsibilities are covered as well. It used to be that only states were recognized as subjects of international law, addressing such things as sovereignty, peace and security. However, recently, how states treat their citizens as holders of international rights and duties is prominent in global judicial activities. So it went from the states down to individuals now. Then, of course, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There is a fundamental human dignity, it states, that endows everyone with human rights separate from the will of governments. This is why the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted in 1948, proclaiming that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and that everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of person. Thus, there is a minimum standard of treatment, a threshold below which no civilized nation should drop. So, then there's a new phase in human history, which proponents of world government argue that presently disconnected and uncoordinated approach to international governments hinders peace and eliminates many opportunities. So there you have it. It's a recipe for the global governing body. It's the United Nations, folks, and we're watching it happen right now.
In a world where our culture is traveling down a road of spiritual mediocrity, do you want to be one of the few who travel the road of spiritual maturity? Then I recommend Endtime University. This 6-semester course will guide you through understanding the Bible, keys to spiritual growth, life and teachings of Jesus Christ, and Satan defeated, sonship restored. Watch the lessons at your own pace using the structured outlines. Use the quizzes and answers to test your comprehension. Receive a completion certificate when you finish each semester, and a diploma from Endtime University once you've completed all 6 semesters. Matthew 7:13 through 14 says, "Enter in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many will go in. Because strait is the gate and narrow is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Endtime University will help you walk the straight and narrow path to spiritual maturity. Call 1-800-ENDTIME and ask about Endtime University today.
I want to introduce you today to what I call the Armageddon Hospital. It was October of 2010. The headline, Israel builds world's largest underground hospital, immediately arrested my attention. When I read that it was being built in Haifa, Israel, I fully understood the implications of this announcement. Haifa is located at the western end of the plain of Megiddo, the prophesied site of the Battle of Armageddon. Would the world's largest underground hospital, specifically designed for use in time of war, actually become the hospital to which the wounded of the Battle of Armageddon would be brought? It was obvious to me that the answer to this question was undoubtedly yes.
Go to endtime.com and under Irvin's Thoughts, click the Rambam link to watch the video.
Welcome back to Politics and Religion, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins, and I'm showing you how a world governing body was prophesied in the Bible, and then I just showed you the origins of the United Nations, which is that world governing body already established. And I've been going over a few points of how this world governing body rules the world actually right now. Now, they don't have the actual teeth that they want, but those teeth are growing very sharp daily. And so we're watching the establishment of this world governing body that will eventually be ruled by the Antichrist. So moving forward, the rule of law and the New World Order. The New World Order was a familiar catchphrase of the 90s. President George Bush popularized it when he announced the U.S. attack on Iraq January 16, 1991. He stated, "This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and the Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations." President Bush was referring to a globalist process involving the integration of governments and economies into one worldwide network of the rule of law, administered and enforced by an expanded United Nations. Well, I have a couple questions that you can think about. How could nations of radically different ideologies and cultures agree upon one common political authority? Going to have to give up some sovereignty. What about the inevitable resistance of nation states who want to maintain their sovereignty and the rebellion triggered by masses of people concerned about their loss of individual liberties? How is that even possible? Well, Henry Kissinger spoke to these issues in an address to the Bilderberg meeting at Evian, France on May 21st, way back in 1992. So we're not watching the beginning of this entity. This is the culmination of it. Henry Kissinger stated, "Today, Americans would be outraged if UN troops entered Los Angeles to restore order. Tomorrow, they will be grateful." Now, I'm talking about on United States soil, folks. This is especially true if they were told there was an outside threat from beyond, whether real or promulgated, that threatened our very existence. It is then that all peoples of the world will pledge world leaders to deliver them from this evil. The one thing every man fears is the unknown. When presented with this scenario, individual rights will be willingly relinquished for the guarantee of their well-being granted to them by their world government. I got to tell you, folks, my right to liberty comes from God, not from any government. And so I'm not going to start preaching to you today, but I'm just telling you this world governing body is a humanistic solution. I've been to the United Nations several times. There's never a mention of God. There's never a mention of Jesus Christ. They don't mention Him there. It's all humanistic. It's a humanistic solution. It's what this world governing body is going to be all about, and the Antichrist will rule over this humanistic solution before it's all over with. Globalization, folks, was inevitable. Since the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, terms such as world community, international law, and globalization began to appear more frequently. Universities in North America and Europe began to routinely advertise for positions in global governance. Following the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center under President George Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair, the United States and the United Kingdom have been largely in crisis mode, under threat of domestic terrorist acts, generally ignoring many normal constitutional protections. The prevailing thought is that world order is essential to survival on a small planet when anarchy anywhere endangers peace everywhere. Alexander Wendt, an influential international relations theorist, has recently suggested that a world government is simply inevitable. The concept of world government supports the creation of an international authority that can address the global problems that nation states currently cannot. So you say, well, what does the term globalization mean? Well, the goal of the United Nations in 1945 was world government. The goal has never changed. Strobe Talbot summed it up in his article in Time magazine in 1992 when he said that in the 21st century, national sovereignty as we have known it will cease to exist, and we will all answer to a single global authority. Now, folks, we signed a Declaration of Independence, not interdependence. We wanted to come out from a tyrannical government, but yet our past several presidents have been adhering to a lot of the principles of the United Nations. So we need to pull out of that entity before it's over with, and that's our prayer that God will help us with that. Moving on, globalization means exactly what it sounds like, the conversion of the governments of the world into a global government. International law refers to the laws of international government. The World Bank, the World Trade Organization, and the World Health Organization are all elements of a 2,000-year-old Bible prophecy. Think about it. About a world governing beast which rises to power after the devastating global war. Now we know that there's a third world war just ahead of us. Imagine what the global government will look like on the other side of that. Nations will be readily available to give up their sovereignty for protection. So here are just a few examples of how the United Nations is endeavoring to govern the world today. These are just a few. There's hundreds of them. Here's just a few that are very recognizable. The United Nations Sustainable Development Summit 2015 coming up here the latter part of this month on September 25th through the 27th in New York. The United Nations Summit for the adoption of the post-2000 development agenda. At this summit, the United Nations will adopt a new set of sustainable development goals to replace the Millennium Development Goals that will expire this year. The United Nations is committed to ensuring that these sustainable development goals are fully implemented and realized over the next 15 years or by 2030. The United Nations has come up with 17 specific sustainable development goals that they want to use to manage the lives of every person on earth. This summit in September is being held so that they can reveal these goals to the nations of the world and get them to sign on to and commit the implementation of these goals in their own countries. It is nothing more than a management meeting for the governments of the entire planet. The outcome document for the summit is Transforming Our World, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Well, so you say, what's sustainable development? Sustainable development is just basically a catchphrase used by activists and government agencies involved in the implementation of Agenda 21, which, according to the UN's own website, is a comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations of the United Nations system, governments, and major groups in every area in which humans impact the environment. The ultimate goal of Agenda 21 is the control of the United Nations and a future one world government of all human settlements, determining where one can live, what land should be used for, etc. It's one world government all the way down on our local level. Then, of course, you all heard of the climate change conference, like COP21, that's coming up in December. The United Nations Conference on Climate Change to be held in Paris, France, in the latter part of, I guess it's November and December this year. They are building it up as the event that will finally be a universal agreement on climate change. Folks, the global warming and climate change propaganda that these people are trying to sell us is just that. It's a hoax. With a communistic agenda driving the mechanics of the organization, it's easy to see how the global elites have been able to work from within the UN to quietly build a one-world government. A socialistic world government is the goal, and promoting belief in global warming is the number one vehicle that they've chosen to reach that goal. One of the core belief systems of socialism is that most conflict in society stems from an ever-broadening gap between the wealthy and the poor. The contention is that the wealthy are the ruling class and will inevitably use their economic power to enforce their will upon the less fortunate. Well, the ultimate socialist solution to this problem is to abolish private property ownership, for the state to own all principal means of production, with the central government reestablishing wealth evenly among the masses. They decide who has what and who doesn't. The result would be a classless communistic society where a global government would ensure equality, you've heard that term lately, for all citizens. It would be impossible to fully realize the dream of a communistic one-world government without the redistribution of wealth from the developed nations to the poor, underdeveloped nations of the world. This is the main goal of the global warming climate change hoax. The United Nations elites know that a perpetual global life-threatening crisis is necessary to convince wealthy nations to accept the punitive cost of cap and trade taxes, among others. And wealth redistribution is exactly what carbon cap and trade laws are designed to accomplish. The government will set a cap on the amount of carbon emissions that an industrialized nation can emit. If the limit is exceeded, carbon credits can be purchased from underdeveloped nations who have more credits than they need. Remember, we have proven conclusively on other programs that CO2 emissions have nothing to do with global warming. Global warming fear mongering is simply a scheme put together by global elites to redistribute the wealth of the world and to move us into a one-world governing body. Global warming is only one of the messages being used to force the nations of the world into global government. Anytime you hear global governance, propaganda like Agenda 21, sustainable development, nationalized health care, social justice, and national identification programs, think world government. But it is global warming, climate change, I should say, to be politically correct, although we're not politically correct on this program, that is presently the poster child being used to frighten everyone into giving up freedom in order to save the planet. So what are we talking about here, folks? I've given you this world governing body that's prophesied in the Bible. Revelation chapter 13 gives a clear depiction of this world governing body. Then I've shown you several ways, and I'm going to give you a couple more, how this world governing body is controlling the world right now as we speak. Upcoming summits and conferences used to sign treaties that will put a noose around our neck. It's all prophesied in the Bible 2,000 to 2,500 years ago.
Hello, this is Judy Baxter. My husband and I would like to invite you on Endtime's Fall Prophecy Tour to Israel. I've been there 24 times and I'm still excited about going. I love sailing on the Sea of Galilee where Jesus walked on the water and going to the Garden Tomb where Jesus rose from the dead. And as you probably know, my husband's favorite place is standing on the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem where Jesus will soon return. Not only will we walk in the footsteps of Jesus when he was here on earth, but we will also be walking into the future, learning from the Bible what will soon take place. I can't recommend a greater prophecy lesson than going to Israel. We look forward to getting to know you as we have made many friends on these tours. Space is limited, so register today by calling 1-800-ENDTIME and ask to speak to my daughter Jana or my granddaughter Holly about the tour. In Israel, there is a special feeling that is hard to explain. It's probably knowing that Jesus Christ himself walked in that land. I hope you will come and experience a trip you will never forget. The Lord bless each and every one of you.
Welcome back to Politics and Religion, everybody. I first want to thank y'all for joining us. I know that we have a lot of people that really contact us from around the world to show their support and to partner up with Endtime and to banter back and forth on different prophecies and biblical views and things. And we're really thankful for that. It shows that everybody's really studying and they're putting their time in and trying to keep up on these world events that we're all going to live through. If the Lord will tarry, and He doesn't call us home before that, we'll live through this world government, the mark of the beast, and all these different things, the false prophet, the final 7 years. So you need to understand clearly what this world governing body is and all these different prophecies. And hopefully through our magazine and television programs and this radio program, we can help educate you on what's coming up in the very near future. So on today's program, I've been showing you how that there is a world government prophesied in the Bible, where it was at, Revelation chapter 13. And I've been showing you different ways on how the world governing body is already established and functioning in the world right now. So moving along, the former governor of the state of Washington, Dixie Lee Ray, probably summed it up best when she said, we were talking about global warming, the objective clearly enunciated by the leaders of the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development is to bring about a change in the present system of independent nations. The future is to be world government with central planning by the United Nations. Fear of the environmental crisis, whether real or not, is expected to lead to compliance. So they're telling you right there, it's not real. We know that. It's easily disproven, global warming and climate change, but they're saying whether it's real or not, it's just expected to lead to compliance. Compliance to a communistic world governing body is the goal, and the global warming climate change deception is the life-threatening crisis that the United Nations has chosen to get it there. It's actually one of the main ones. Remember the words that President Obama said, though, however, because climate change is not a hoax. Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Obama, it actually is a hoax. It's been proven to be a hoax easily. And so it's just one of the other ways that the United Nations is trying this fear-mongering to get everybody to conform to their edicts. Now listen to this one. Here's another way. Education. Common Core is a United Nations-inspired plan to federalize education and turn students into global citizens. You've heard of Common Core lately. And it is preparing the world to be a global community. Most of the nation, with the exception of Texas, Alaska, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Virginia, voluntarily opted into Common Core when it was first presented in June of 2010 and excitedly awaited their federal funds. Well, how did this happen? Well, the roots of the concept can be traced back to the influence of Robert Mueller, former Assistant Secretary General and the prophet of hope of the United Nations. It all goes back to the United Nations. In 1984, the link between Common Core and the United Nations became apparent when UNESCO published a document entitled UNESCO and Common Core, from the grandfather of Common Core, Robert Mueller, founder of the World Core Curriculum. Robert Mueller has been called the father of global education. He sees the United Nations as a God-sent instrument for world peace and a true turning point in our planet's and human evolution. Mueller said in 2006, within 15 years, now this is 2006, we will have a proper government and administration of planet Earth. Remember the Sustainable Development Goals that they're trying to pass at the end of this month. And of humanity. At the Global Citizenship 2000 Youth Congress, he said, you must remember the earth. I would even say that the word global education and the word global citizen. I'm almost tempted to change the words and to replace them by earth education and by earth citizen. We are children of the sun and we are children of the earth. Sounds like the United Nations to me. Humanistic solutions. As we compare these themes with the stated goals of UNESCO, Agenda 21, the Earth Charter, and outcome-based educational standards, we can discern the central philosophy and worldview which form the historical basis for today's Common Core state standards. So, another way that the United Nations is trying to control the world is disarmament. It's one of their main platforms. Last week we discussed in detail one of the United Nations 8 major objectives, which is disarmament. It's called the Arms Trade Treaty. Secretary of State Kerry signed the Arms Trade Treaty on September 25th of 2013. However, at this time, the United States Senate, thankfully, has never ratified the treaty. However, officials from the Obama administration attended an arms trade conference in Mexico last week, the week before last. At that meeting, countries agreed that all future decisions concerning the international arms trade would be made by majority vote, eliminating any possibility of veto. There's no checks and balances. Majority vote rules. In the text of the Arms Trade Treaty, it begins with the statement, guided by the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations. There we are, folks. Everything goes right back to the Charter of the United Nations, established written by a convicted communist spy in 1945. It all goes back, and we're still adhering to that 70 years later. The United Nations that's their constitution. The United States has the constitution which we're supposed to be adhering to. The United Nations adheres to this charter. According to Article 12 of the Arms Trade Treaty, each state party must keep a 10-year record of all conventional arms that it receives or ships. The quantity, the value, the model of the weapons, the type, and this goes all the way down to the end users. Think about that. So the Arms Trade Treaty is not going away just because the United States hasn't ratified it. It's obvious that the leaders of this nation are willing to sidestep the Constitution of the United States and work hand in hand with the United Nations for the universal disarmament of every person on earth in order to achieve one common goal. That goal? Absolute control and a world governing body. Now, folks, I haven't even touched on the International Monetary Fund and the cobweb that they have around our world. The World Bank, the International Criminal Court. All of these entities are so interwoven through the fabric of our society, and they're not only wanting to be on state levels, all of it, like the Agenda 21, we've adopted that down into our localities. If you go for building permits and different things, you can see that. You want to put a pond on your property or a lake or something like that. They want to control what you do with your property, what you do with your home, consumption, production, everything. They want to control every aspect, right down really to what you think. What do you think hate crimes and hate speech are for? You've heard those mentioned. They want to control what you think, what you say, what you eat, everything. How much electricity you consume. Not to mention all of the treaties, declarations, resolutions, etc. It never ends. Folks, prophesied in the Bible, there's a world government that's going to form just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. The Antichrist will rule that one world governing body. And hear me, the United Nations is that world governing body. That's why the United States shouldn't have any part in that. So with that said, I have a few questions for you. If something is good for you, why would free people be asked to give up their sovereignty to implement it? If it's good for you, don't take my sovereignty away. Well, Walter Cronkite made the following remarks when accepting the Norman Cousins Global Governance Award in 1999. He stated, "It seems to many of us that if we are to avoid eventual catastrophic world conflict, we must strengthen the United Nations as a first step toward a world government patterned after our own government with a legislature, executive, and judiciary panel, and police to enforce its international laws and keep the peace. To do that, of course, we Americans will have to yield up some of our sovereignty. There it is. That would be, of course, a bitter pill. It would take a lot of courage, a lot of faith in the new order. Well, remember what I said earlier on. The new order is simply, the New World Order is simply world government. So everyone, please listen to me in the time that we have left. Please listen very closely. I know that most folks think that the United Nations is the last great hope for peace on the earth today. That could not be the farthest thing from the truth. The United Nations was designed from the very beginning to be a world government. The Bible says that most of the world will worship or pledge allegiance to this entity and the eventual leader of this world government, who will be the Antichrist. Revelation 13 describes the one world government. What is the goal of this one world government? Well, the word worship in Revelation chapter 13, meaning to pledge allegiance to or worship, is mentioned 5 times in this chapter. The whole goal of this is to get everybody on earth to bow down to the edicts of this one world governing body and to the Antichrist. The Antichrist will demand complete allegiance of every person, so much so that he will persecute those who will not comply, according to Revelation 13:15. To do this, though, however, will be to commit spiritual suicide. The Bible says that Satan gives this entity its power. So 2 things you should never, ever, ever do. Always remember these 2 things. Never, ever pledge allegiance to, thereby worshiping, this world governing system or its leader, and never take his mark of ownership, which will be the mark of the beast. The Bible in Revelation 13, 16, 18 clearly states that the Antichrist in this world governing system will give everybody their own unique identification number. And without that number, you're not going to be able to buy or sell. Just like this world governing body sanctions nations right now. You've heard about the sanctions on Iran to keep them from building a nuclear weapon, which are fixing to be lifted. Well, they're going to economically sanction individuals under this Antichrist world governing system. That's 2 things you should never do. Never pledge allegiance to this world governing system. Never take a mark of identification on your person ever, to make sure you never comply with this world governing system prophesied in Revelation chapter 13. Thank you for watching.
Politics and Religion is a production of Endtime Ministries. It is a daily 1-hour broadcast dedicated to bringing you the prophetic fulfillments happening on a daily basis.
If you would like to listen to archive shows, subscribe to Endtime Magazine, find a prophecy conference in your area, order Endtime resources, watch our TV show, or subscribe to our free weekly e-news, call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com and take advantage of what our site has to offer.
Connect to Endtime Ministries by partnering with us and help this message make a global impact.
Endtime Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to all of our loyal partners, listeners, and friends for helping make Politics and Religion and Endtime Ministries possible.